Castaneda whenever we were in the Southwest, and of course the prayer would be that Castaneda would come back at some time. When we first came here, La Fonda was just starting to feel its Fred Harvey-ness, and so the idea that La Fonda would feel more like a Fred Harvey space was a distant memory. The truth is that the Grand Canyon was not so into Fred Harvey during the time when we were doing the research on the book, and certainly it has gotten more interested in it. And the other thing that we prayed was that someday we would be able to have dinners in Santa Fe where different chefs would take on Fred Harvey dishes, and we would raise money for the museum. I mean, I actually remember thinking that the first time and telling Jenny and Fran Levine, who was the head of the museum, that, and they both looked at me, as they do often, as if I am insane. But here we are, and we're going to have this amazing panel, and then we're going to go have this dinner. So that's good. Dream big, and we have to get all the next ones, too. So what I had hoped with this panel was, first of all, to get Cedd Moses here to talk about the work at Union Station, which almost nobody knows anything about, except we've all looked at the pictures of it, and believe me, the comeback of Union Station. And when I talked to Cedd, he's like, well, I don't know if I can do this because we didn't make it into a Harvey restaurant. And what I said was, we're happy you made it into any restaurant, and that we can eat in it, and that people care about it, because these spaces are to be cared about. I knew Matt McTigue years ago because when we first toured the Grand Canyon, he was the sous chef, and the PR people took us back into the kitchen to meet the people, and Matt was nice to us. And I was always interested in what it would be like to be the chef at the Grand Canyon, because unlike these other restaurateurs who can make whatever they want, in order to have a menu at the Grand Canyon and work with the Park Service, to add anything is like, as we say, a big schmagegi thing. I was really happy that Matt would come, and Matt is here representing Xanterra this year. And we have people from Xanterra often every year coming. And so obviously the big news in our neck of the woods here in New Mexico is that we have 2 new restaurants in Fred Harvey spaces that are opening and unfolding before your eyes. So the Legal Tender in Lamy, and Murphy O'Brien is here, and he will talk about that in that space. And Sean Sinclair has already opened Bar Castaneda. The bar food has gotten so many great reviews. I'm kind of frightened to think about what the reviews will be once the Kin is actually opened. We will be the first ones technically to eat in the whole place, I guess, tomorrow night. But the grand actual opening of Kin is going to be in the spring, so it's all a work in progress. We are all impatient people at the Afelt Mion places. We want them to be finished, but we don't want to wait for them to be finished to start enjoying them. So that's been the process with all the buildings they've done. So lots of these things are a work in progress. What we invited these guys to do was to each give a little talk and show some pictures of the places that they are running and talk about what it's like to restore and use these places as restaurants. And then we're going to have a panel discussion with them that you will be able to ask them questions as well. The person who comes the longest gets to go first and gets the centerpiece. So Cedd Moses is going to go first. Come up here and run your slide if you want to, and you can do your slides from here. And we're already up. Do you want to click, or do you want to just push? Do you prefer to click, or do you prefer to just push? Click it. You can either push or use the button. It's this one here. Yep.
All right. Hello, Fred heads. I'm a fellow Fred head. Honored to be here and be talking in front of all of you. I grew up in an artistic family. My father always loved the Fred Harvey restaurant in downtown LA. Apparently he dated a Fred Harvey girl, and he was a famous artist, quite a character. He passed away recently, but part of the reason I did this place was I grew up with him telling me stories about Fred Harvey restaurants and hotels around the country. So I run a group. We have 32 bars, mostly bars throughout the country. So I kind of had a vision to restore this space, the Fred Harvey space, as more as a beer hall brewery, because restaurateurs couldn't figure out how to restore it. It just didn't make economic sense. It was just used for bar mitzvahs and so forth, and it was extremely run down. Needed a lot of work, to put it mildly. But it's kind of boring. It's the budget. This was the space back in its glory days, back when my dad was going there, and maybe some of you too, back in the, it ran all the way until the 60s. It was closed for 50 years. But by the time I got hold of it, it was very run down. We put about $6 million into restoring this place and building it out as a brewery, restaurant, beer hall, and bar. So this was back in the heyday. I don't know if you can see the floors. Actually, Mary Colter was inspired by Moby Dick to build this and try to make the interior feel like the inside of, you were inside a whale's belly. Have you ever heard that? Yeah. So, and the floor is amazing. It looks like it's basically, if you look at it close, it's kind of geometric shapes. But when you stand above it, you can see it makes basically a big Navajo blanket. But this was a little different for Mary Colter in that it was also, you kind of see the deco features, which she put in to kind of match the rest of Union Station. It reopened, the space opened at the same year as Union Station downtown, which was 1939. Pull it out. All right, that's better. All right. This is what it looks like today. So it was kind of labor of love for sure, restoring the floors, the ceiling, a lot of aspects. It was nicotine stained everywhere, which I kind of liked, but basically it's a thriving beer hall basically now. You can see there's 2 bars in this space. There's another bar. There's 2 other bars in the space as well. But we serve great food too, but I don't consider myself a restaurateur. I'm honored to be on the panel with you guys. So, this was another view of the space back in the day and what it looks like today. So those floors are amazing. This was one of the old cocktail bar, which was added on later, which we brought back. Wait, you can kind of see it here. That's another shot of it. But we used a really great historic consultant and really good historic preservationist. It took about 5 years to restore everything. This was space back in the day, what it looks like today. And in order for the project to work, the kitchen was over 6,000 square feet. The main room was about 6,000 square feet. And you couldn't change that really, so no restaurateur could figure out how to make it work. So my crazy idea, you can see how high the ceilings were, was to take part of the kitchen and turn it into basically a brewery. So that's part of why it cost so much to build it out. But now we're making Fred Harvey beer in honor of Fred Harvey. So. That's it. I want to give time for everyone else, so answer questions.
Thank you. Sure. Did you bring the beer? Is it in bottles or cans or just on draft? It's on draft. All right. You know, it's been one of our, every year when we do this, we try to get somebody to make Fred Harvey beer. Of course, if you make it and can it, getting it into New Mexico will take like another several years, but that's another question. If you can,
we can streamline that.
Okay, next up is Matt McTigue, who is the executive chef at El Tovar at the Grand Canyon. Clicker where you can use that.
Afternoon. Thank you for having me here. I guess I'm a little unique in that we haven't had a renovation. We've been continuously open since 1905. In the time that I've been there, we've had 2 or 3 renovations, and you know, we've got our own engineering department, and within that engineering department, we have a historic department in that too. So I haven't had the problems that you guys had. I've been very lucky, very, very lucky in that. But what I do have, as Stephen was saying, is Park Service. Is there anybody here that works for Park Service? Okay. Just got to make sure. So this is just an old picture from some of the maps. These are some of the things that we show at our orientation to our new employees. So with the menu that I work with, the challenges that I have is we have what we call a core menu. So 30% of my menu is core, or considered core by Park Service. So that's steak and eggs, or 2 eggs any style for breakfast, coffee, hamburger. It's like 30% across the board. Then we do what we call a comp study, where we go throughout Arizona and we need to find 5 comparable restaurants for each restaurant. And I've got 5 restaurants for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We take those menus, we put them on a spreadsheet, we look at like items on the menus, and then we take that average price, and then that's the price that we ask. So people have a tendency to say that we are price gouging, but we're not. It's completely controlled by Park Service. So, like Stephen was saying, if I want to introduce something new or change one of those core items, that's a picture of Tovar's dining room from early in the 1900s. We consider it's like trying to turn a battleship. It's like getting an act of Congress to change the menu sometimes. It really is that difficult. And then also what is it? Is it the train station? Oh yeah, wow. Obviously I didn't look at my own PowerPoint. And the BA is currently in a remodel too. We just had a whole new kitchen put in. That was really nice. We need to redo the dining room as well. This is an old BA menu, some interesting stuff on there. Prices are pretty darn cheap too, $1.45. Turkey a la king, veal cutlets. It's another Bright Angel. We actually brought back this menu cover about 5 years ago, and we're still using it this day, and then we're actually changing the concept in there to the Fred Harvey burger. 1947, of course. And that's it for me. Sorry. Thank you.
Sean, you're next. Castaneda. Do you even know what you're showing? Just tell your story and look at the pictures. We're interested in your story. I will say, by the way, and Sean maybe would say it anyway, but Sean and Alan met each other at the Fred Harvey Foodie dinner last year. So lots happened in a year. And so we're very proud of that. And anyway, Sean's.
Thank you. This is how this is? All right. So, hi, I'm Sean Sinclair. I'm the executive chef and proprietor at Bar Castaneda, and soon to be Kin, which we're opening in March. You get a little sneak preview. Those of you joining us for dinner tomorrow night, of the dining room and the direction it's going. It's not complete yet. It'll be even more beautiful than you see it tomorrow, but it's pretty nice, and we're excited about it already. So this is my first time through this slide as well, so we are on this ride together. Above, you'll see the beautiful hotel and the branding for Kin at Castaneda. The marigold is important to us because our dog's name is Marigold, so the flower is for her. And this is a picture of the original hotline. On the far right side, you see an 1800 French broiler. There's a steam table, which has now been repurposed to our server station in the dining room, and you'll get to see that tomorrow. And then the stovetop, which has been repurposed as a buffet. It's moved locations. Quite a struggle, from what I'm told. About a dozen guys had to get on that thing to move it. This is actually the exact location of the current hotline, although it's been modernized just a little bit. Yeah, here's removing the original stove. This is, on the left is my wife and I during renovations. This is right when I think that photo is actually before we had signed the lease, but we were already hooked. And then on the right, that's prepping for the Harvey dinner well before I knew anything about the Castaneda, and right before I had met Alan for the first time. The kitchen, which is hard to look at in this shape now, that it's beautiful and shiny and clean. So this gives me a little bit of a headache. This is closer to it. It still, again, gives me a little bit of a headache because it's dirty and cluttered. But I can't wait to show you it tomorrow. We're really proud of this space. Alan kind of really just handed me a blank set of plans and said, do your thing, which is any chef's dream come true. You can ask anyone. It's been a pretty amazing process. There's us in service, so that's my team prepping, getting ready. I don't know what I'm doing there. This is, I think this is the first time we preview the menu. So this is the night of our first service. We had a couple soft openings, one with 20 and one with like 40 guests. So this was the first time the food hit the plate in its final form, and we kind of trained the staff on what it should all look like. That was a stressful day, but lots of fun. This is the old dining room. Well, still the same space, obviously, but some serious updates have been made. This classic style with the white tablecloth and the wooden floors is gone, and I'm guessing there's a photo in here somewhere of the more updated dining room. The red. I'm so glad the red is gone. Thanks, Alan. Here's the booths in queue. We decided to go with booths mostly because of the extended format of our dining service. When we do get Kin open, we'll be doing an extensive 12-course tasting menu. Those will take about 2.5 hours if you eat quickly, up to 3 hours. So we had to make the seats extremely comfortable. The booths have probably been would you say, one of the biggest challenges of designing the dining room, going through different design setups and actually building the booth and saying, oh, this isn't going to work. We needed to change it 3 inches here and 4 inches there, and but we finally got them done. There's our carpenter Bob, who came through and finished the job and has just done tremendous work. It's really gorgeous. Oh, the Castaneda under the stars. This was fun. We didn't have the booths done, so we had to squeeze 100 people inside the dining room space. So the chairs are so tightly packed that you can't actually stand up. That was still lots of fun, but it's just growing pains, and getting a restaurant open. There's never a dull moment. The Castaneda at night is one of the most beautiful things I've seen in my life, and I think will continue to be. The lunchroom. What's really neat about the lunchroom is part of it is where our bar is now. So a lot of people don't know that story, and it's always really fun to tell that story to someone sitting right under the beam and be like, you're sitting right where the wall was for the original lunchroom, and above the bar where the hood was. It's the very beginnings of the Castaneda. Yeah, there was a disco. There was like a stage kind of thing, and they had to tear it all up. You won't recognize this space from these photos when you walk in, and it looks completely different. I can't even tell that's the bar at this point. It's come that far. It's starting to look more familiar now, but behind those two double doors, where they opened up all the walls, is where the photo that was shown earlier of the bar, the length of the bar. So that's where the bar sits, and in the rest of the space is seating for the dining room. We have about 60 seats. Kind of putting finishing touches on the walls. And there's the bar, starting to take shape. It's beautiful. Branding for the bar space. and the finished bar. Tons of attention to detail went into it. It's stunning. Every guest that comes in makes a comment on the bar, and I can't tell you how. One of every two people asks if it's the original bar. That it was. I mean, it was done so well. Oh, this is a cocktail that's coming off the menu soon. We'll keep it in our back pocket as like an off-menu drink, but it's called Locomotive Breath. And we smoke the cocktail, and it actually has a little cloche. So even if you're not sitting at the bar, we bring you the drink, and it's a little interactive. You pull the cloche off, and the smoke pops out. Oh, awesome, the Coldikes. So we have a special connection with these folks. Mike Coldike, the fellow in the yellow hat, he's an amazing human. He's the owner of the Isotopes. He founded the Golden Apple Foundation, which is a huge thing for teachers, both in Chicago and in New Mexico. But they're actually, so him and his son Ben, sitting to his right in the cowboy hat, there are beef ranchers. So they're raising Wagyu beef bred with Champion Black Angus beef, and we'll be the only restaurant receiving this product in February is when the harvest will happen. We're working together on the diet for these animals. We're doing the sonograms together to check the growth and the intermuscular, a lot of nerdy beef stuff. But it's kind of a look into what we do at Kin and Bar Castaneda with our sourcing. We take it very, very seriously. When the restaurant's up to full capacity, we may end up spending nearly $1 million a year on food and drinks and alcohol and other items. So our mission as entrepreneurs in New Mexico is to keep every dollar that we can in this state. And people like Ben and Mike and other farmers and ranchers are so crucial to that mission because they're the ones that supply the food. So. Oh, we won Best Green Chili Cheeseburger. It's called the Harvey Smash Burger. Again, it's when you buy a burger, there's 10 different farmers and ranchers throughout New Mexico that we utilize to put on the plate. I mean, although it's 10 cents here and 11 cents there, buying a burger supports 10 different local businesses in New Mexico. 11 if you count us. The bar, great shot. This is like every Saturday night now. It's been pretty busy. It's good. Alan. And this is before the Castaneda Under the Stars. You can't tell, but my wife is pulling her hair out. Katie in the front there. That night we had to serve 200 guests, and it wasn't set up yet, and the equipment delivery was late, and the table rental delivery was late. So of course we're running behind schedule. It was like 4 hours till guests show up, and Dan made us hold still to take a photo. And we're like, ugh. This is her second visit to the bar. She came up, Michelle Lujan Gresham, Madame Michelle Lujan Gresham, came to the bar opening night and then recently came again on a trip. And she's a lovely person, just an amazing lady. Me being a goof. Oops. This is the bar, not the way it's set, but that was for the big event. Yeah, great article. We've been lucky to have a lot of press and attention on the Castaneda, both on the hotel side and on the restaurant side. That mariachi band that Tino was talking about earlier. That's it. Great.
And last, can you cue up our last thing? Murphy O'Brien, many of you aided legal tender this morning, but Murphy's going to show some slides and talk a little about the legal tender project.
Okay, I'll be quick. I'm not tall enough to have to pick this, take it out of the holder. That's good. So I'm Murphy O'Brien, and a little over a year ago, a mutual friend of Alan and I said, you know, you should meet Alan Affelt. He just got the legal tender out in Lamy. And so I had a little restaurant up the road that I was perfectly content with. And so I thought I'd go out and say hi and be like, you know, modern day welcome wagon guy and say, if I can help in any way, let me know. And I ended up leaving with a set of plans. So that's the kind of contagious effect that Alan has on people with his enthusiasm to restore and save historic and Harvey-related properties. And I got the bug. So, and I'm grateful for that. I'm really happy to be doing it, and it's been a fun journey, and will continue to evolve and be really amazing. Part of the enthusiasm that people have is it's almost overwhelming at times that, you know, that we Fred heads bring to the table, that it's just, it's almost hard to even, we've been so booked that we're in weekend number 9 right now, that we are really taking, you know, you hate to turn somebody away over the phone, you hate to turn somebody away in person, and it's just been a challenge. So I kind of look forward to the day where it mellows out a little bit and people will be able to just wander into Lamy and wander into the legal tender and be able to get a table. So let's see what Dan put together here. We can always rely on Dan. So the building was originally a mercantile, and in the 1880s it was built, and there were probably fires over the years and so forth, and it being rebuilt, and but the section on the right there is a bar, and is still a bar, and became a bar probably in the early 1900s, late 1800s. Here it is today. I don't know whose car got in the way there, but and that's not a really good perspective on the building because it's kind of shrunken, but there it is more from, so beyond the train there you can see the left room, which has a patio on the front of it. That room was added by R.O. Anderson probably in the late 1960s, and the two buildings on the right are original buildings from the 1800s. Beautiful old sign that flashes, the lights rotate around. Not so pretty. That's our fireplace with tons of stuff stacked. That must be from back in R.O. Anderson days, I would imagine. And at one point in time, you would step down from the bar into the main area that had, so you could either step down into the bar, and it probably went down a couple feet, and then, or you could go up into a balcony, a U-shaped balcony that went around, and there was a stage and performances. So many of the incarnations of the legal tender, it doesn't matter what experience people had with the legal tender over the years, they have such fond memories. People tell me all the time, oh, I had my prom here. There was a couple last night that was celebrating their 30th anniversary, and they were engaged there. It's just endless, the stories. Kids talk about, or adults talk about when they were kids, being up on the balcony and watching their parents dance below on the dance floor. So lots of fond memories, and people are so enthused to have it back again. That's the rear section of the bar and the old steps that would have taken you up to the balcony, and then to the left down into the dining room. The pink garter was when it went from being more of a mercantile that had a bar next door to being a real restaurant and saloon. And the bathrooms are being built there to the right, probably in the 1950s. This was probably about 20 years ago, a little more. Not that exciting. Alan and I, that was probably about last year at the Harvey brunch.
There's a lot of last year's Fred Harvey lunch.
Yeah. Which we didn't really have a whole lot of restoration to do, unlike the Castaneda. We had inherited a building that was in pretty good shape. It needed to be cleaned up. It needed fresh paint, maybe new curtains. The bathrooms that were built in the 50s and were built to look like they were built in the 50s, we took and made them look more period and put in marble counters and improved that and made them feel more like the rest of the building. But we fortunately didn't have to do too much to the space. But it does look quite a bit different now than back then, when Alan and I were eliminating some more modern-looking display cases and decided to take a little nap reminded me of old like Catholic church deals that they would have these figures on, kind of more morbid. But that was an old train. What do you call it? Yeah, or a display that they did that is of Lamy and is now part of the museum here. We don't know when it'll go back on display, but it's a layout of Lamy and the legal tender and really well done, and hopefully it'll make it here to the museum and be on display at some point. But the room was clearly darker, and the old velvet curtains have been repurposed to a certain extent, and it looks very different and a little more open and cleaned up. That was us. Dan likes that I like to be hands-on.
Better you than me.
We opened up that wall right there to allow some room. The room behind it was fairly dark, and so we wanted to let the light in and make this room feel more a part of the other room. And it was pretty successful. We struggled a little bit at the top with the new openings. It looked a little too contemporary, but then there was some neat. Alan's working on the L or T's there, I think. She's kidding. But you can see how dark the room was. And the lattice work that's up there that is probably from the Far East or Middle East, and we ended up putting that into the new openings, and it kind of took it back, made it look less contemporary, and it's been really good. There are the openings with the studs still there, and the room. It's kind of funny to see this.
I would skip this one and move on to the last video.
This is kind of cool. Only the Brave. The bar used to be white, and they painted it this red color for the movie Only the Brave. So that's Josh Brolin and Jeff Bridges, and I don't know the gentleman's name in the middle, but so they were supposed to paint it back after filming, and everyone liked it so much that they said leave it, So this was when Sam Latkin had just decided to do the right thing and turn the museum over to Winslow Arts Trust. This was at the Harvey Brunch last year. My nephew Rory with working in the kitchen, and if he wasn't there, we wouldn't have signed on to the deal. Okay, sounds good. So, an honor to be here. Thank you so much.
Take this mic over here and give it to me. So I'm going to ask the panel a couple of questions, and then we'll open it up to your questions. I'm going to start with Cedd because I'm curious. All these other spaces have had different kinds of histories, but we'd always heard tell of why it was be so hard to save the Mary Colter space. So you talked a little bit about that in your comments, but I'd love to hear sort of what you heard about it in the years before, and then what, how you finally did it.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Space, it kind of had a cult following with kind of historians and so forth, but a lot of people really didn't even know the space existed. So it's kind of off to the side of Union Station, so a lot of people didn't know about it. But every restaurateur that I talked to just kept telling me, I'm like, what's up with this space? They said, well, it's an impossible space. It would be too expensive. Doesn't make any financial sense whatsoever. You have to be a madman to take that space on, which I've been accused a few times. But it was. But when I saw the kitchen, that's what kind of opened up the idea, because I just had a successful brew pub. I took over the old Crazy Gideon space. I don't know if you know who Crazy Gideon is in LA. He is crazy. He's my landlord. But I took over like an old electronics store and built this giant brew pub in Arts District in LA that's been really successful. So that gave me the courage to go in and to the former Fred Harvey space and kind of reimagine it as a giant beer hall brew pub, and that it hopefully would work out.
Was it a historic landmark, and were there issues being able to do that?
Oh yeah, it was a historic landmark and so forth, but we worked through it. There was aspects of the kitchen that were not historic, and we were able to use that space specifically to build the brewery within it. But there was historic tile work and so forth in the kitchen, which we is very much part of the kitchen space still. So we were able to preserve all the space that was historic. It was a historic landmark, and but be able to build a brewery within it, which allowed the space to really come back as in a slightly different usage.
And I'm curious what kind of research. I will say that I think the Union Station restaurant is one of the spaces that we know the least about, because it was done almost at the end of the Harvey regime, and it was the first one that was done by the Chicago Harveys and not by the people who built all the previous buildings. So anything that you learned either about Colter's work in it or about the architecture as you took it apart would be, I think, very interesting for this group.
Yeah, I mean, I unfortunately don't know as much as some of you about former Mary Colter buildings, but I'm a fan. I think it is interesting because it's so different from a lot of Mary Colter previous spaces. She had to work within the context of it fitting in with Union Station, which was considered mission modern architecture. It was like mission style with modern elements, like deco elements, like those amazing chandeliers in the space.
And she had nothing to do with that design. She just inherited that design?
Yeah, from what I understand, she was told that they wanted some continuity between the Fred Harvey restaurant and Union Station. Union Station was mission modern, so I think Mary had to incorporate some modern elements within the deco elements within the space, which is not typical of her. I don't know. That's Mary.
Sorry,
reaching
Mary.
out. Sorry, Mary.
Okay, apparently Mary did design Union Station.
We appreciate you, Mary.
Okay, is there anything else? Because I will tell you that part of what I think our mission is to try to find out more about these spaces, and I do think that your space, all the Hollywood stories have been told about it, but not so much the behind-the-scenes stories. So I know that I've talked to Alan and Tina when they've taken apart some of these buildings. They've found cool things. Mary? Quiet. Did you find anything in the walls or in the taking things apart that were fun?
Most of the walls were already closed up. We were just restoring tile work and so there's, I don't know if you've seen the tile work is unbelievable, hand-painted tiles that are just unbelievable. So getting a chance to work with all that historic, beautiful details that Mary put in there was such an honor. I mean, that's still what makes this place special. But there's a few, you know, there wasn't really much that I mean, everything that you see in the space was Mary Colter features that were important, significant in my mind.
And was your feeling that people in LA knew who Mary Colter was by this point, or no?
I mean, I think I work with our press people and so forth, and our press releases were trying to pay respect to Mary Colter and give people a history of the space before we opened, so give people a reference point. LA Weekly did a huge spread, like a 6-page spread, that really went into the history of Mary Colter and what the significance of this building, so that was good to give people a reference point, but a lot of young people unfortunately don't know Mary Colter, so it's kind of an honor to be part of a project that hopefully is educating people again about her significance. Of course, we had a great architect, God, that did, you know, the projects, Herald Examiner and the projects, you know, downtown and San Simeon, great female architect in California. So she's always stood out. But her name's dropped. Julian Morgan. Yeah, Julian Morgan, another great female architect, significant projects in California. I think she is more known in California, unfortunately, but I think Mary Colter is just significant.
I'm curious for all you. Go ahead. I'm curious for all you guys. I mean, of course, the answer to us is that, of course, all you care about is Fred Harvey, and you just want to recreate these places for us. But I'm curious what it is to deal with a historical place and to deal with how much of the history you really want to use. You know, I mean, we need to send you recipes and kind of stuff, but you don't need to use them. So while we're thrilled the spaces are there, I'm kind of curious to hear about what isn't Fred Harvey and sort of whether parts of being in a Fred Harvey space is sort of a pain to sort of deal with its past. Does anybody have a...
Sure. Hello. I don't know if that's working.
Oh, it's the microphone.
Hello. It can be a challenge to, you know, because there are a lot of expectations that come with the buildings, I think, and it's so you're kind of, for me, I'm trying to go more to the history and the Fred Harvey and kind of going with a modern classic theme, where we're taking classic dishes and putting new twist on them and doing maybe a little more updated version of a dish that might have been on a Fred Harvey menu. But then it can kind of tie you down a little bit as well. So we're trying to walk that line of doing some old, some new, and try and meet people's expectations, but also get them to branch out a little bit. But it can be a challenge.
We're very fortunate at the Castaneda to have two spaces, so two separately functioning restaurants. So in the bar, where we're taking a little more modest approach to food, our highest price items like $20. We pay a more direct homage to the style of food and taking dishes directly off the menus and recipes and the catalog of files that Stephen was nice enough to send me at the beginning of the research period to write the menu for Bar Castaneda. So that's kind of the space that we pay a more direct homage. But in our other space, we're trying to pay a homage to Fred himself, who although lived in the Victorian era and the late 1800s and early 1900s, he was still a modernist. He was a forward-thinking person. He was fascinated by hospitality and perfection, so that's kind of the way that we'll be paying homage to Fred Harvey and kin is, chasing that thing that doesn't exist in perfection and making sure that our services are as well-rounded as we can, and everything is on point as absolutely possible and seamless, for the guests to really be taken away for that 2.5-hour trip where they don't have to think about anything outside of dinner. So that's kind of how we want to wrap it up and pay homage in a couple different ways.
Matt, at the Grand Canyon, what is how does Fred hang over any of this? And you've been there long enough to see for times when
Constantly, his portrait is in the it's in the lobby of El Tovar. Really, at the Grand Canyon, it's the total experience. We have people coming up on the train every day, anywhere from 4 to 1,200. Sometimes it's one train, sometimes it's two coming up from Williams. And it's the experience of seeing the canyon, getting off the train, walking up the hill, and just seeing the grandeur of the canyon. And then you're coming into the building, and El Tovar was designed by Whittlesley, and it's an old European lodge style. It's very dark, very foreboding. And the dining room is very open, and then it's got big open windows on both the north and south side, so as you go in there, it's kind of hard, your eyes adjust. And then it's the style of service that goes along with it that just completes that whole experience. That's how we try to honor Fred, for sure.
Is there really, what does Fred Harvey food mean to any of you? Because I will say that I think that everybody has their own idea of it based on...
It's the way that he streamlined service and that he improved the quality of product that he was giving to the guest. The average stay for us, or the average visit, is only 2 hours in the park, 2 to 4 hours. So we still got to kind of do the same thing that he did, get him in and out real quick. And it's
30-minute gourmet.
Well, it's hard to do in El Tovar when the dining room is 220 seats, and I've got 3 line cooks and 2 in the pantry, and we're rocking out 400 covers. It's difficult, so we do everything that we can to streamline it in the back of the house, where we're batch cooking our sauces and our starches, and just making it, bringing it down to the lowest common denominator for the cooks, at least.
I think it's a great way of describing it, because we always look at the food, but in fact, it was the process that at the time people were more impressed about, that Fred Harvey could serve so many people so quickly in the dining cars, in the restaurants. And I think we also forget that the Harvey Company jumped on trends, didn't necessarily make them. Although the reason for a hotel food and for dining car food was to introduce people to food that might be hip in the cities or in Europe, but that no one in America had heard of. So there wasn't, some of us may see Fred Harvey cuisine as like diner cuisine or some very simple American cuisine. But if you look at all the old menus, it's everything. There is no Fred Harvey style of food at all.
This year is the 100th anniversary of the Grand Canyon, and the actual date was back in February, and I was asked to create a menu that was from 100 years ago. And looking back at it, it was like, people aren't going to eat creamed oysters with horseradish and sweetbreads and stuff in aspic. It doesn't go these days. The cuisine has changed so much since then. The only thing that was common on that old menu was prime rib. So that's what I served. It wasn't that original, but that's what they were serving 100 years ago.
We have time to take some questions from the audience. So who has questions for the chefs? This is Daggett Harvey Jr., the senior member of the family that worked at Fred Harvey. By the way, how many Harveys are still here? We didn't introduce the Harveys today. These are the Harvey family members. They get the good seats. There were more of them, and you'll see more of them at dinner tonight. But Daggett?
Thanks. There's too many of us sometimes. Well, first of all, I think you guys just astound me. I keep thinking the word death and transfiguration, the death of the old Fred Harvey, and you guys bring it back. And Alan, you too. Just astounding how you can bring something from death back into life. I just think it's wonderful what you're doing. I think my question really was, you saw and you represent the transformation of a chain along the eating houses before the dining cars, and now each one has its own tradition. So when you look at the menus that you've found, each one has its own local system. I wondered how how much that tied in with the idea of the chain and how much that idea at El Tovar or at Castaneda or La Posada for that matter, how much is local versus how much was imbued from some central Fred Harvey headquarters?
Anybody? Everybody?
As far as product, we try to source locally, but I mean, when was the last time you were to the canyon?
2 years.
Okay. How did you come? Drive up from Flagstaff or Phoenix or? From La Posada, okay. Unfortunately, there really aren't that many farms within like a 100-mile radius of the Grand Canyon. It's a pretty arid area. So for us, for us, local is like 400 to 450 miles. We are resourcing our beef in Arizona. Most of our vegetables come from southern Arizona during the wintertime, and then we source from California during the summertime. But we do try to do local as much as we can. But bottom line, we're a company and we need to make money. So, you know, it really does play into cost.
We've founded the entire menu based on sourcing local, and sometimes, this spring off our first menu, we had this, fresh garbanzo bean hummus, a green chickpea hummus, and then there was one weekend where we were expecting an order from the farmer and we were simply out. So we just didn't have that menu item anymore. And that kind of inspired the next menu change. So we change our menus strictly based on what we can get.
You don't have to deal with Congress on that? No?
That's my last job.
We definitely source a fair amount locally, and especially with our proteins. And I wonder with Fred Harvey, I think a lot of what he did was streamlining and making it making restaurants that were able to deal with high volume and in an efficient manner and in a consistent manner. So a lot of right now we're only open 3 nights a week, so a lot of our business is consolidated into a really small window, and that'll change as time goes by, but you really have to be able to be efficient and consistent, and that's where we're working on approaching our menu design from, as much as trying to do local and organic and quality well-sourced ingredients.
Cedd, I was going to ask you, am I remembering correctly that when you opened the place, you had more food and then you cut back the number of dishes and made it a little more into a brew pub? Am I remembering correctly that was the?
It's gone through a couple changes, but
So I'm curious
we're
to hear
still
about.
focused mostly on beer, which you can't get much fresher in that place.
Mm-hmm.
Much more local or much more fresh, but yeah, we have amazing fresh oysters. So I think every great train station should have a great oyster bar. So yeah, we have great selection of oysters.
I mean, is it because Union Station is an unusual building in an unusual place? Did you just guess wrong about what would work, or?
I think it just took us a little time to figure it out, and it's mostly just got to be flexible. But
The food, by the way, is amazing. We ate there not that long ago.
Oh, good. I'm glad you love the food. Yeah, we have a great chef that we worked with to do the food, but it was meant to be food that accompanied. It wasn't like fine dining. Food that accompanied the beer and the cocktails. Some people call the cocktail America's greatest culinary invention.
Mm-hmm.
So it's served around the world. So my bars are kind of well known for our cocktails.
Do we know of historic Fred Harvey cocktails?
I do not. Most of the menus I see are based on just offering pretty historic, classic cocktails, and at much lower prices than today, of course.
I think that I know Sean's going to talk about this because Sean's looked at some of them, but I do think that we have ignored the beverage part of the Fred Harvey Company in our work, because what we know is that the Harvey Company was way ahead of itself in terms of what wines they brought. First it was European wines, but a lot of the wines would not have been available in most places, but they were in the restaurants. So I do think that there's work to be done. But Sean, you picked up on some of the cocktail recipes and made up some yourself?
Well, the ones that we're serving tonight are house creations.
Yes.
But historically, especially in the early days, from my understanding and the menus that you've provided and the things that I've been able to find, the cocktails were basically what, in modern terminology, we call a sling. So it was like an overproofed, really heavily alcohol-forward, spirit with sugar. And that was kind of, they sweetened it to take the edge off of it. I mean, so like a sling that you would all know is an old-fashioned, right? That's essentially it's whiskey and sugar, in now case there's bitters involved, but that was really the mainstay of the Harvey cocktails, kind of whatever spirit they could get with, some sort of sweetener. And then beyond that, they did start bottling their own whiskey, but that didn't happen, I think, until the 20s. About that, yeah. And I've seen there's on some of the Facebook pages that I follow, I've seen there's people that have full collections of these bottles that are still full.
Yeah, they bottled whiskey,
Yeah.
they bottled scotch. There was
Yeah.
private label scotch. That could come back. If there's Fred Harvey beer, there can be Fred Harvey distilled things as well. Yes.
I just want to know, can I order my smoking locomotive now or tomorrow night?
We will have that available for you, I promise. Yeah.
Are there other questions? Yes, this gentleman's been waiting for a really long time. You.
2 generations have passed since the end of the Fred Harvey chain. So I'm wondering if any of you have ever had a customer who said, this is exactly what I remember, or this is not like it at all.
I have items on my menu that have been there. I've been at Tovar for 25 years. There are items that are still on the menu from before I got there, specifically the French onion soup. And I've had people do blood. See, I see the lady behind you. And the recipe has not changed, and it will not change. And I have had people that have been, I was here 30 years ago, and I was hitchhiking across country, and the only thing I could afford was a cup of French onion soup. And they were like, I'm in tears because this is bringing back memories. So definitely.
Other questions? Yes. Here, Kathy. Use the microphone.
I'm in my head, we spent a lot of time at the Canyon. I'm trying to figure out the 5 restaurants. Are you counting the bar
Well,
in Tovar and
So
Bright Angel?
there's El Tovar, and then in the Bright Angel, well, it was called the Bright Angel Cafe, now it's called the Harvey House Cafe. There is the Fountain, and there's the Arizona Room, and then there's Maswick, which is a food court, which also has a pizza pub in it
I
as well.
forgot about Maswick,
Yeah.
okay.
This is more a comment that harks back to Harvey food. Is I have this memory, I was sitting in La Fonda, I was very small with my father eating salt-rising bread. And I can still remember the aroma of that bread. And I think there's a recipe for it in the Harvey cookbook. Salt-rising bread.
I think that actually we have probably not paid as much attention to the Fred Harvey baking. I mean, you guys who inherited these buildings have these big-ass ovens. Right, so they had a huge, besides they had all the baking they did, they also had takeout baking businesses in a lot of the Union stations. So there's a lot more that can be done. Does anybody else have any other questions? It's been a long day. Okay, wait, we have one more. Go ahead. It's a good one.
Just wanted to know how the name Kin originated for the restaurant.
So my wife and I spent some time in Virginia, Rappahannock County, a county that houses less than, or about a little over 1,000 people. Yeah, there's no stoplights. I worked at a place called the Inn at Little Washington, which is not, it's world renowned, but it's not super well liked in the community. They call it the Inn that ate Little Washington. So there was this kind of tough entry, with the locals. We lived in the city of Washington, population 92. Katie and I leaving affected the population by over 1%, which is pretty crazy to think about. So you know, after our almost 3 years there, we fell in with some locals and have some lifetime friends in that area of the country. And, you know, with the farmers and the ranchers and the way I like to connect into areas when I, you know, kind of integrate myself as a chef in certain areas. You know, a gentleman kind of gave us a parting gift and a big hug and just said, you know, y'all come back anytime you're kin. And so kin to me doesn't feel just like it doesn't, you know, it means family, but it doesn't just, it means more than that. It's earned, you know, it's something that's like not just a for granted thing. It's a, you know, it's your kinship that you protect. And so the idea of our restaurant is very different from your classic dining experience. It's, you know, that you're coming over to our home for dinner, and if you were to come over to my home for dinner, you'd be greeted at the door with a drink, and as soon as you sat, you would be fed, and you wouldn't have to make up your mind about different options and things. You would get everything. So that's kind of how we're going to run the restaurant. It's definitely different from looking at a menu and picking it. We'll hand out the menus after the dining experience. You know, of course, we will ask about any allergies or aversions during your reservation, you know, but it'll be kin itself. The tasting menu will be by reservation only, so we'll be able to get a chance to kind of get to know you before you step through the door. So, yeah.
Sounds great. I hope that everybody here gets to eat at all these restaurants. This is the end of our lectures for this year. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank the New Mexico History Museum and Billy Garrett, the interim director, for having us back, and hope we will have us back again next year.